Hello and welcome back to Rec and Rule. My name is Brian, and we got hit with a pleasant surprise yesterday. Renegade Game Studios, who is putting out the upcoming Transformers deck building game, gave us the rulebook. And I'll be honest, I did not think this was coming for about another month. So what I wanted to do today, and even though I did it not that long ago, I'm not a big fan of doing the whole talking over a slideshow type of video, especially for kind of like showing you how a game works, because I think it's a lot more helpful to have that physical game in front of you. But what I found to be helpful for me is I'm learning something, especially before I get it to the table, and especially before I teach somebody else how to play it, is to kind of create like a Cliff Notes version of the game for myself, put it down into bullet points, put it into steps, and kind of like use those notes in addition to the rule book as I play through that first game. So think of this more like being a primer about how the game is played. And then we will eventually do kind of a full on like how to play with the physical game once we have a copy of it, of course. This is going to be split into two different videos. First one's going to give you an overview of the game and some of the basic concepts in the game, and also talk about setting up the game. And then hopefully later this week, I will talk a little bit more about kind of like how the game is actually played, how a turn works, all that type of stuff. So with that said, as a reminder, the rule book is available. I will link to that in the description and in the first pinned comment also on the video as well, so you can check that out for yourself. Beyond that, I also want to kind of come out and say that I was pretty wrong. I tried to draw parallels between how the Power Rangers deck building game worked and then how this game is going to work, thinking that there would be significant similarities. It turns out that's not the case. And when the Renegade staff, when they were mentioning that, I kind of thought that even though they were saying they were significantly different, that the changes would not be as large as they are. They are significant. With kind of the first point being, there is no Decepticon player. I thought that a player would control the Decepticon side in the competitive mode. It's not the case. Even in the competitive mode, the players are all Autobots working against the Decepticon, AI more or less of the game, but you're trying to kind of like outscore the other players. You're trying to win better than they do, which is maybe when you hear competitive for this game, think more along those lines. Now, what's interesting is that you are still trying to help each other, but you are also kind of trying to throw each other under the bus and sabotage each other. So it is pretty interesting how that works. I'm looking forward to that. I think that if you have a good play group, I think that that's going to be really cool to play. You can also play just completely cooperatively, where you are just working together and you are not trying to sabotage each other. Next up, so reminder, this game is now available to pre-order if you are in the US, and if you pre-order from Renegade, you get a promo pack, which includes Jazz as a playable character, which you are going to want. And then also 4 cards that go in the main deck. And let's be real, you want Sideswipe, you want Sunstreaker. Vortex is interesting because it hints towards Combaticons. There are also more Combaticons mentioned in the rule book, and also Constructicons mentioned there too, which is interesting. Also interesting is that Frenzy has like a little identifier here saying that he is a mini cassette. So I wonder if there is some type of functionality with a sound wave also in the set, because the other bot characters do not seem to have that. If you take a look at Sideswipe, there is no car identifier, which again, intriguing, right? So check it out if you're international. Some point during the summer, you will also be able to order from Renegade, but they're kind of updating their web store functionality to handle international orders. That's not ready yet, but you will also have the opportunity to order and grab these too. Okay. And again, the game is coming out in August. There is some time. It is okay. One other thing, I mentioned before in the previous video that we had like an unofficial discussion group for the game. Renegade has created an official discussion group, and we do not want to split the community. So because of that, make sure that you go and you check that out. I'll link this in the comments and in the description. And then also I'm shutting down the other group. If you're in there, make sure that you get to the new group. You can see that. I'll link it, but in case, if you don't want to wait for that, You see the name right there. Just search it in Facebook. It'll pop up right there. Now, again, what I'm doing today is giving you a quick overview and also talking about the setup of the game. We'll dig deeper into how the game actually plays in a future video. So first up, whether you are playing competitively, which again, even though it's competitive, you are still fighting against the Decepticons, but you're trying to do it better than the other players. Whichever way you play, competitive or co-op, the game ends after you either beat 3 Decepticon bosses or after you would go to add a card to the matrix, which is basically kind of like the name for the board that you create out of cards in the main deck. If you would go to draw a card to put it out into the matrix, but the main deck is empty, so you can't put anything out there. At that point, the game is over. And then if it's competitive, you would tally up everybody's victory points, which you get by acquiring relics, which are powerful items. You also get it by defeating Decepticon bosses, adversaries, defeating schemes. All of those things get you victory points. So if you are playing competitively, you tally up and see who kind of won the best. If you're playing cooperatively, then again, like there's no tallying at the end if you just beat that third boss or if you kind of go out there in order to draw a card, but you can't. At that point, you win as long as nobody has acquired 5 damage. If anybody acquires 5 damage in co-op or solo, the game ends right there. You're done. Okay, talk more about that next time. Don't sweat that too much right now. Basics of the game is like a deck builder, any deck builder. You begin with a basic deck of cards. Everybody has the same basic cards. And then your goal is that you want to acquire better cards into that deck to make it more powerful. And you have various resources that you use to do that and to use abilities. We'll talk more about that soon. And then again, you get some more information about getting VPs. We'll talk about the matrix again pretty soon too. But again, when you see matrix, it's basically the name for the board that is created out of cards that you explore, you fight, you try to buy, all that type of stuff. The resources that are used in the game. So power looks like a little yellow battery symbol up here. You use that to either buy cards for your deck or to battle adversaries. Range allows you to extend the reach for buying those cards or battling. Move allows you to move around the board and also to search. So cards that are face down in the matrix, you flip up to see what it is and then interact with that depending upon what type of card that is. Energon is a resource that you use to transform or to use abilities on cards. For a character card, you see right here, they give you Wheeljack as the example. So just kind of basic things. They give you the name. There's a bot mode. There's an alt mode. For a lot of you, it's going to look familiar, right? Generally, bot mode seems to be better for battling and other like exploring type of things. Alt mode is good for moving around the board. You see there's a movement value here. That same movement value is not there in bot mode. There's also abilities that are kind of innate to that mode. There's also abilities that you have to spend Energon to do. I believe that every character that you play has a 1 Energon cost and a 2 Energon cost ability. On your turn, you can only ever use either of those one time. And then same thing for any other Energon abilities that are out there on the field. And I think that's all I needed to hit on character cards for now. It is cool to note that they do a really good job of making it thematic. So Wheeljack is an inventor. So when you play technology cards, it gives you bonuses. So that's pretty neat. I'm excited to see what they're doing with the other characters. I think we get a hint of what Bumblebee can do, but it's hard to zoom in closely enough to get a clear look. I'm sure somebody probably has already done that and can provide that. So your main deck cards have a couple of different elements, right? So there's a name. Up top, there's a number. That number tells you how much power you need to be able to spend in order to acquire that card. Depending on the type of card, it might either go into your discard pile, and then eventually you'll draw that card. It might go directly into your hand to be able to play. It might go into your vault, depending on how the card works. Buying it, there are different things that go with that. You see if there are any power, range, or movement values, it's right there. Any rules text right there. They identify the type of card here. So Jazz is a robot, and more specifically, is an Autobot. It does specify later in the game that there's only Autobots and Decepticons so far. Other than that, there is an innate ability that you can use. There is an Energon ability that you need to spend Energon to be able to do, again, only once per turn. And at the bottom down here, if you battle that card, that's how many victory points you get. Interesting that Jazz is an Autobot, but you can battle him. There are hints in the rulebook later that there are occasions where sometimes Autobots out there on the Matrix may become hostile towards you, and that's pretty cool. And also the flip too, that you can kind of recruit Decepticons into your team as well. We'll talk more about that in a future video. You see here the different types of cards. Some of them are included in the main deck. Some of them don't get included. We'll talk more about that soon. Don't worry about that too much yet. So again, the Matrix is the name of the board that is created, and I'll show that to you guys in a second. It gives you specific directions. Sorry, it's me doing this. Give me a second here. Apologize for the extra sound effects. So here you see some setup for that main deck. Don't worry about that too much yet. You see here a representation of what that matrix that I keep talking about, what that looks like. And depending upon the players that you have in the game, 1 or 2, it looks like this, a 3x4 grid. If you have 3 to 4 players, it's a 4x4 grid. If you have 5 players, it's a 4x5 grid, right? So more players, kind of more space to kind of move around and explore and interact with the cards that are there. Don't let the term matrix trip you up. Think like a matrix in math class where it is kind of like a grid of numbers. It's kind of a play on that basically. All right. Next up. Oops, sorry, too far. When you've got that done, so after you have populated the matrix, just 1 card in each of those spots, you then make 3 different stacks. And then each of them has the same number of cards depending upon the number of players in the game. As you have more players, there's more cards in each stack. In that very last stack, there are only 5 cards. So there's a 4th stack, only 5. The other cards left go back in the box. So you're not going to see every card every game, which is cool. Gives you some variety. And then in addition to that, the fact that you only see 3 Decepticon bosses out of 6, I think it gives people who want to get creative the ability to set up like a scenario where you play against the Constructicons. Because one of those bosses that you see in like a pile seems to have some green coloration to it. And the only one I could think of in like the first couple seasons that would fit with as a tier 3, level 3, like biggest, baddest boss might be Devastator. Don't quote me, okay? Just kind of taking a look at what's there. From there, you've got your 4 stacks, right? So the first 3 have a specified number. They tell you for 2 people playing, there are 9 in each of those stacks. It shows you back here, same thing too, right? There are 6 Decepticon bosses. You divide them into a level 1 pile. There's 2 there. There's 2 in your level 2 piles, 2 in your level 3 pile. You randomly choose 1 from each, and then you populate them into those stacks. So you put a level 1 boss into stack 1, a level 2 boss into stack 2, level 3 boss into stack 3. Okay, there's no boss in that last stack. But again, like it kind of gives you some time once the boss does appear, the big boss at the end, to kind of deal with them. Like it kind of gives you a little timer to be able to defeat them. If you're playing co-op or solo, there are also some cooperative scheme cards that go into, when it says each of the 3 stacks, I assume it means 1, 2, and 3, nothing in that last one. And then from here, you kind of pile them up. So stack 4 stays on the bottom. Stack 3 goes on top of it. Stack 2 goes on top of that. And then stack 1 is there at the top. The basic idea is that you know that early on, you're going to face that level 1 boss. And then sometime in the middle, the level 2, near the end, that level 3. And once they do show up, you know that you're on some type of timer for how quickly the game is going to go. Okay. And then at this point, that is your main deck of cards. So in the matrix, as cards go away, like if this card gets purchased or defeated or goes away for whatever reason, it gets repopulated with a card from that stack that you just made. Okay, we call that the main deck. And then from here, there are some other cards that go next to the matrix as well. They're always available for you to grab. Talk about them soon. Player 1, whoever recently watched or read anything Transformers goes first. If you ever play this with me, you know it's going to be me. So For your player area, just kind of, this is pretty basic, but still pretty cool. You obviously could choose who you want to be, or if you want to basically draft around the table, there's a method for doing that they give you as well. Your character begins in alt mode. Again, should be familiar to you people at home here. You grab your standee, which again is cool that you have a standee. So again, I know I keep saying this, but think of this more like a board game. Think of this less like a card game. It is much more like a board game, even more so than other deck building games, which still feel basically like a card game. With this, as you move around the matrix, it is a lot more like a board game. Okay, at least from what I can tell so far. From there, this is your 10 card starting deck. There are 6 courage, 1 firepower, 1 patrol, 1 fix, 1 reserve. I can take a guess. I want to say courage probably gives you power, which you can use to buy things or to fight things. Firepower, I assume gives you range, but I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. Patrol, I assume gives you movement. In fact, I think you see that later in the rule book somewhere. Fix, I assume allows you to either get rid of a damage card that you take, or it might allow you to destroy or get rid of cards in your deck that you no longer want. Reserves, I'm not sure about that one. I was thinking Energon at first, but that does not seem to be the case. Those could be wrong. A lot of those we've not seen images of yet. It's just my guess. From here, shuffle those 10 cards, draw 5 to be your starting hand. Every player begins with 2 Energon. You take some tokens to denote like different statuses that you might have during the game. From here, when you have it set up, if you're playing with 2 players, this is what that looks like. So here is that matrix of cards that you've created. Here's that main deck, all the different stacks in one, right? Your bosses are in there waiting for you. And then here is player 1's area. Here's player 2's area. And I should probably zoom in to see what Ratchet and Prime do, but I'm not going to do that right now. From here, this is transform and roll out, a card you can always buy, which is generally pretty good, but probably is not as good as some of the cards you can buy that are here in the matrix. Encounter cards are used if you fight or if you get ambushed. And then damage cards you might take due to various negative events that happen in the game. So again, types of cards. Each card has a different color to denote that. Just a quick rundown of those cards. Allies are humans and their equipment. When you buy it, it immediately goes into play. So it does not go into it as a you don't get it in your discard that you draw later. Like, you immediately get it. But the flip side is that some of the bosses can scare them away, and there are other cards that also seem to interact with ally cards to where they take them away either permanently or temporarily, and some that might allow other players to take your allies. Your basic cards are cards that do not go into your, they don't start in the main deck. Okay, you can buy, transform, and roll out. Damage cards are different. We'll talk more about that soon. Cooperative schemes come out that players have to deal with during co-op games. Your boss cards, they get you a lot of VP. They also seem to have effects that affect everybody on the board, so you want to deal with them. And again, if you defeat them, you get VP. So if you're playing competitively, you want to have that happen. If you're cooperative play, you want to either do it to advance to the end of the game, or to kind of get rid of the negative effects that might be ongoing. Decepticon schemes, again, are kind of like things that seem to have a constant status that affect everybody potentially. Encounter cards you use during ambushes, or if you confront an adversary. Confronting seems to mostly be against bosses. Maneuver cards seem to kind of be, other games might call them an event or action type of card. Relics are powerful cards that either you can use or you can put them into your vault. When you buy them, they can either go into your vault right away or after you've played them on a future turn. But you want to time that carefully, because if you don't time it well, if the game ends before you think it's going to, you won't get those VPs if it's not in your vault. Relics cost more. They seem to have cool effects. So, for example, I believe that the Matrix, if I'm not mistaken, allows you to buy any robot on the board. And that includes Decepticons, which usually you cannot do. Robots, again, Autobots and Decepticons, we talked about that. There are ways that it seems that you may have to fight against Autobots. There are ways that you can recruit Decepticons. Sites seem to be locations on the board that, unless they tell you to scrap it, they remain there, but they cannot go into your deck, I believe. Yeah, they can't be bought. At least they can't be bought. There might be other ways to get them, but they're a location that has kind of a persistent effect where you might be able to go there to trigger an effect. Your starter cards are your 10 cards you begin with. In the future, you want to get rid of them because you'll get better cards. And the technology are equipment and utility cards that are tools, but they don't give you move. And again, we've seen that Wheeljack specifically gets bonuses from playing technology cards. Again, this is one of the cards that is next to the Matrix. You can buy it whenever you want to. And it's a little bit better than your starter cards, but eventually you'll have cards that are also better than these. But if you only have 2 power and there's not much else you can buy, this is a good option. The other good thing is that generally you can only buy a card if you're in that spot on the Matrix or you have range to get it. But this you can buy whenever, wherever. Damage cards you take from negative game effects. In solo or co-op, if you have 5 or more, you are defeated. In competitive, if you have a damage card, you are forced to ask for assistance from other players, which allows them to kind of like freeload off of you to get victory points, which you don't want. Like, you kind of want to have the most points. There's some more explanation here. So they never go into your deck. You don't ever draw them, but they stay next to your character card. And anything that allows you to destroy a card from your deck, it seems you could also use that to get rid of your damage cards. But interestingly, unless a card tells you to put it back into the stack of damage cards, once a damage card is gone, it's gone. So eventually you just won't take damage if all 20, I think there's 20, get placed on the characters and then are somehow removed. Encounters, so here when there is an ambush or when there is a confrontation, which is against a Decepticon boss, or maybe also potentially if you are just battling, then there are some things that happen here that kind of randomize what happens when that enemy activates, whether it's an ambush or a boss confrontation. This is something where I want to take a look at this better in the next video where we kind of go over that. Like right now, at the surface level, it doesn't make a whole bunch of sense yet because there's not enough info presented that I'm giving to you guys. It's there in the rule book, but we'll get there soon. So that right there is the kind of basics of the game and how to set up the game. Next video, I want to give you guys some more information on how the game is actually played, what a player turn looks like. My quick overall impression so far is, again, this is a lot more like a board game. That idea of you've got your little standee and you kind of go to different spots around the Matrix and you do different things around the board. That movement makes it less like a card game and even less like a card game than most deck building games are. That sense of movement, I think, makes this a lot more like a board game. And again, I like that, right? I also like that for competitive, you are trying to do little underhanded things along the way to make things harder for the other players, but you still have that overall goal where you were trying to defeat the Decepticons, defeat the bosses. For co-op, it does seem to be a little bit more challenging because those damage cards seem to be relatively easy to get. And then acquiring 5 seems like it's not going to be that hard to do. So if you play co-op or play solo, it does seem as if there is a degree of challenge to it. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you guys sticking around. Hopefully this was helpful to you because it's, again, a little bit selfish of me. I'm basically doing this to teach myself how to play the game. I hope that this also is giving you some value as well. And we will see you guys next time with more details on how the game is actually played, what a turn looks like, the differences, a little bit more specifically about competitive versus co-op. Have a good day, wreck, and rule.